think I may just have an answer to one of the most pressing problems of our times. A bold statement, yes. Our times require bold action. And this has always been a bold step for me, which started 20 years ago. I was teaching in a school in the community here in San Diego, and I had students from all different backgrounds, ages 13 to 19, and they had one thing in common, and that was that the traditional system didn't work for them. I had students who are African American, Hispanic, Asian, white, kids who've been kicked out of their continuation schools, coming out of juvenile hall, the minimal security facility, kids off the streets, a whole kaleidoscope of children. And in our classroom, we had rules. It was tolerance, patience, trust, and kindness. And if you could do those things, you could stay. And anything other than that, there was flexibility for, because these kids needed that. We created a community of safety where they could be themselves, authentically self-expressed. And they were working on all kinds of issues that they had to make it to graduation and to make it in this world. And one day, one of my girls came back. She had been away for a couple weeks, and she came back just on fire because she was, for the first time in her life, as a youngster, clean and sober. She had gone through a treatment facility based in her religious belief. And she came back full of passion and purpose and promise. And we were so excited for her because she had a young child. She was 17, and this was her break. And as she shared over the days about her thoughts and her beliefs, I started to notice a shift in my classroom. And with these kids, my motley crew, motley meaning colorful, their energy was like a pressure cooker, bubbling, 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 and expanding. And then I would realize it was about to blow, and it was time to gently, gently, gently push it back down. And then we would start over. And on this day, it was bubbling, and it was bubbling, and I realized there was a rift in what was happening, what she was sharing, her thoughts, her feelings, her beliefs. And I noticed the other kids started to shrink back in their posture. And I noticed that they weren't sharing anymore. There was a lack of excitement. And I realized that while she was sharing, she was beginning to have what we would call a closed mindset to anything other than what she had just learned to be true. And the other kids were really trying to stay engaged, but they felt less and less and less engaged because there was no room. And so in the front of the class, as I'm leading these discussions on a daily basis, I noticed that my own self started to shrink and to step back. And where's my compassion, and where's my love, and where's my support for her when I'm starting to feel like them? And so I remembered my rules: tolerance, patience, trust, kindness, compassion. And so I just stayed with her and asked questions and got her to talk more and more about what she felt and what she thought and what she believed. And I, without doing this overtly, just encouraged the rest of the class just to stay with her, and to open to where she was. So this went on for 2 weeks. And every day I went home and said, "What?" And every morning in front of that class, I was saying my prayers: "Help, tell me what to do." And just one day, in the midst of this conversation, she said something, and I felt the opening. And her belief was a belief in Jesus and his teaching and his love. And in that moment, when that space was there, I asked her that. I said, "Yes. And what did Jesus teach?" And the room got quiet. Big question. And I leaned in and I went, "Love." And you could just feel the tension break apart in that moment. And these guys just went, whew, and smiled. And she just opened and was, aha. And I'm going, thank you. So I went home that night and I said, what just happened? And it dawned on me that what we had created in that moment was a conversation about spiritual diversity. It was a moment where we learned how to take what we've been doing with race and ethnicity, elevating that level, and what we've done with differently abled people, all different abilities, and how we've begun to do that with gender differences and preferences. And here we are with another taboo to talk about spirituality in the schools. And when we look at where we are, and when I look at where I was 20 years ago, it was time then to be bold in that moment. And it was time to be bold to take that program along in my journey as an educator. It was what we say in our industry of teaching, one of those teachable moments. And I believe that one of those teachable moments is now. And so I took this spiritual diversity in education and I started telling my colleagues about it. You can't say that. And I'm thinking, I'm a heretic. And yet, I had to. I could not continue this conversation. And so I would teach it in my classrooms. I would teach it in the schools that I went to. I would teach it in the community. I would talk about it. I would write about it. That it's time. It's time. We know in our schools we teach about our physical being. We know that we teach about our mental faculties and capacities, and we address the emotional part of ourselves. And yet, where's the spiritual nature of the human being or being human? To have a fully holistic, inclusionary educational system, we must address that part of us. I work with kids who, on a daily basis, are fighting to keep themselves and their will alive. And their literal lives. Why am I here? What's my purpose? What's my point? Because that piece is missing. And what we do is we help them to take a look inside and to find that invisible part that really matters. We have spirit, school spirit, we have life force spirit, and then we have that quiet space within. And unless we're taught how to recognize that and how to cultivate that, we don't know. In the research I did, I found that Bonnie Bernard and also Bonnie Bernard, I'll start with her, they talk about, it was the Search Institute, they talk about resiliency and resiliency factors, and they found that kids who were able to be resilient had some type of spiritual connection in their community, no matter what that was. And so I knew at that time I was on the right path and I had to keep going. So I kept teaching. I kept teaching. I kept teaching. And my students really started to blossom. My kids at my current school have gone through 2 and 3 times, and they're now learning to become facilitators of this conversation. And can you imagine what it would be like if it was natural in our culture and cultures to be able to sit and talk about this in a way that was supportive and loving and kind and tolerant and patient? What would our world look like? In our world, we're in the middle of a global transformation through global communication. And again, we've got to address all the natures, all the parts of being human. In my school, we have Muslims and Jehovah's Witness and Jewish and Catholic and Creator and grandmother, grandfather and the Lord and Jesus and anything and everything that you can think of that we are, that we feel, that we believe in, and even the atheist and agnostic. And one of my teachers, because we teach this to the teachers and the counselors and the principals, all the components of the educational community, the parents, and we're all in one room together having this conversation. And one of my colleagues mentioned that as an atheist, she felt like one of the most unseen, unheard voices. And I thought, well, she has a right to believe that she doesn't believe. And when I'm asked, well, what are you? Who are you? What do you think? Well, I'm a worship hopper. I'll go anywhere that there's a message of love. And I've been to the Kingdom Hall, and I got invited to the Catholic Diocese and the temple. And there I'm always encouraged to keep speaking my truth, to keep celebrating my passion. And so as we're moving through our times lately with world events, I have kids coming to us and parents bringing their children of Muslim faith in because they want their kids to be safe. There is not always a room for the conversation about what that means for them. And so if we look at our world as one world, and we have to create a container of safety where we can show up in the dress that we dress in. And we can ask each other, may I ask you a personal question? What does this mean to you? And I take us through an exercise where we go around the room and we ask questions about, what does forgiveness mean to you and your family? Do you practice tithing? And we go around the room and we talk about how we talk about that part of our essence, that spiritual nature. Do we say God? Do we talk about it as science? And can we listen to each other? I had an example where one of my families was in the course, and this father was amazing, one of the staunchest supporters, and he had an epiphany, painful as it was, with his children. While we were out doing this interactive exercise and they were sharing freely, one of them said to him, you know, Dad, we're really afraid to talk to you about what we really think and what we believe. And he was crushed. He had no idea that he had that closed mindset, that he was not able to truly listen to anything that was different from what he believed in his core to be right. And in that moment, he had to make a choice. And that family left there in conversation, and I knew when they were going home that their lives had changed and that he had changed. And I had another example just quite recently where one of my students came and said, Miss Mech, are you going to teach your class again? And I'm like, Nathan, what's the matter? And he goes, we spent the whole time in our math class talking about religion and spirituality. And I want to know how to do that. I want to know, why is this here? And he's someone who realizes that if we could all share what we thought and felt, then our world would be a very different place. And as a 10th grader, he's ready to take that stand. And so what would it be like if we taught spirituality in our schools? What would it be like if we had the room for a conversation on spiritual diversity in education? Where is it going to come through where it can reach all of us? We've had an amazing experience in the expression of our uniqueness. We've come such a long way where we are. We have a long way to go. And I like to say that in the beginning there was the Word, and that Word was love. And it came to the top of the mountain and trickled down in all the languages and all the religions. And we've gone far and wide in our diversity. And now it's time to make sure that we stay together and bring that diversity through our conversations back as we climb that mountain to the top of love. Thank you.